Hello and welcome to an introduction to the book of Ruth. And I think that our introduction to the book of Ruth means just today. I think that's all we've got to read, the book of Ruth. It's a very short story. It's actually, if you're feeling weary from the Pentateuch, from Joshua and from Judges, then Ruth is the little kind of pick-me-up that you need. It's a lovely story about lovely people with a happy ending, and about the kind of everydayness of life and family and friendship and falling in love and all of those wonderful things all together. So hopefully you enjoy reading that today. Just going to give you a brief introduction, just a couple of things to highlight maybe along the way as you read today. Firstly, some of the meanings of the names. So you've got this couple who live in Bethlehem. I hope you remembered from times I mentioned it before. Bethlehem means house of bread. So the context is the irony that there is a famine in the house of bread. And Elimelech comes from two Hebrew words, Eli and Melech, which means God is my king, and his wife Naomi, which means pleasant. So all is well. You've got God is my king and pleasant living together in the house of bread. What more could you ask for? Only, as I said, there's famine, and they have to leave and they have to go to their neighbouring country, which is the country or the tribe of Moab. Now, the Moabites were God's people's or biblical Israel's historical enemies. And in fact, the Torah expressly forbids any kind of interaction with the Moabites. But, needs must. There's no food. This was the place they went, and this was the place that took them in. Now, they had two sons. Now, the meanings of the names of the sons, you've got to ask yourself the question, why would you call your children this? Because Mahlon and Chilion are not necessarily bad-sounding names on the face of it, but the meanings of those names really are. So you've got Mahlon and Chilion, which basically the names means sickness and destruction. Why would you call your kids sickness and destruction? And sadly, in the story, sickness and destruction, Mahlon and Chilion die. Now, they've lived in Moab for a long time. They've married Moabite women, Orpah and Ruth. And so Elimelech dies, Mahlon and Chilion die. And so all that's left are Naomi and Orpah and Ruth, her daughters-in-law. And they hear the word that famine is gone, that everything is better back home, and they head on back. And there's the story of that. And actually, there's a wonderful bit in chapter 1 where Naomi is basically saying to her daughters-in-law, look, I've got nothing for you. It's better to stay with your own people. Ruth's response to that, I'll leave it to you to read, is beautiful, poetic, one of the most wonderful things that has been said. Now, lots in the story that is there in the background, but one of the things that I just want to tease out for you is that thing about Ruth not being from God's people. She's not an Israelite. She's not a Jewish person. She's a Moabite, and so she is part of the historic kind of enemy of God's people. And she's going back with Naomi to a place where she's an outsider, where she's a foreigner, where she's going to be looked on really difficult. It'd be like a Palestinian woman marrying into a devout Jewish family and then going to live, in the kind of heart of the Jewish country in today's tension. That's the kind of level we're talking about. But throughout God's people's history, and in Deuteronomy in particular, God makes it really clear that there should be this provision for the foreigner. And that's what Boaz, the name Boaz, traditionally in the past has been interpreted as strength, that name meaning, although we're not sure. Ruth, again, we're not sure, might be a misspelling of the word ruet, which in Hebrew means friendship. So we're not 100% sure on those names, but Boaz lives in a way that lives out those commands in Deuteronomy to provide for the foreigner. And I actually wrote a chapter in my book Made to Belong, which is is available at a discounted price. If you would like to get it as an Easter present to someone, it'd make a fantastic Easter present. But in the chapter that I wrote on Ruth, I talk about these readings from Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy chapter 24, where it says that when you're harvesting a field and grain falls to the ground, leave it for the foreigner, the fatherless and the widow, so that the Lord may bless you in the work of your hands. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt. This is why I've commanded you to do this. And again, in Deuteronomy chapter 14, at the end of every 3 years, bring all the tithes of that year's produce and store it in your towns, so that the priests, the Levites, and the foreigners and the fatherless and the widows who live in your towns may come and eat and be satisfied, and so that the Lord your God may bless you in all the work of your hands. Or in Leviticus chapter 19, when you reap your harvest of the land, do not reap to the very edges of the field or gather the gleanings of your harvest. Do not go over your vineyard a second time and pick up the grapes that have fallen. Leave them for the poor and for the foreigners. I am the Lord your God. So it's really clear in God's word that there is this provision for those who are the foreigners, and Ruth is in that position. So the story, yes, is about love, it's about provision, but it's also about how do we care for those who are not part of our group, our tribe, so to speak, even if in the case of Israel and Moab, they're enemies. And of course, again, we go back to what's going on with Israel and Palestine at the moment. Maybe they need to go back and read Leviticus and Deuteronomy and Ruth to see that this provision is there to care for the foreigner, because at one point God's people were foreigners living in the land of Egypt. They were enemies to the Egyptian people and so on. So they know what it's like, I guess is what I'm saying. So there's that story there. How do we care for and provide for those outside of our tribe and our social setting? But also there is the kind of story about how we respond to those challenges and difficulties that come up in life. So you've got Naomi, who is pleasant. Naomi's pleasant. Her husband dies, both her kids die. She's living in a land that's not her own, and she's coming back and the people say to her, "Oh, Naomi, hey, Naomi, how you doing?" And she's like, "Don't call me that. Don't call me Naomi, because, the Lord hasn't blessed me with a pleasant life. Call me instead Mara." Now, Mara in Hebrew means bitter. And that's what Naomi's saying. She said, "I'm a bitter person now because of what has happened to me in life. I'm not pleasant. Now I'm bitter." And are we like that at times? Can we become bitter because of what happens to us in life? That life that might have been pleasant at one time becomes bitter. And what do we do with that? And again, this story of Naomi and Ruth and the relationship they have together is equally as beautiful and fascinating as the relationship between Boaz and Ruth that develops. The last thing, just very quickly, is to say this concept of what is called the kinsman redeemer. So Boaz was kind of from the tribe, the same family, and he takes Ruth on into his family. He redeems her into his family, into the people of God. Where she was on the outside, now she's been brought in. Where she was rejected, now she's been given this place of prominence, and so on. And how Jesus is our kinsman redeemer. He is one of us, and yet he's the one who's brought us from the outside in. He's the one who has given us a crown of joy rather than the ashes of despair. Once we were not a people, now we are the people of God, because of our kinsman redeemer, Jesus. And that's a foreshadowing of that. And so Ruth, a short story, a beautiful story, a great story, and I hope that you enjoy reading it today.